From side proposition, what we've seen is a confused model, and what we've seen is a blatantly incorrect context. So let's jump off the bat and have a look at how this plays out in the real world. So, under their side, what they tell us is that Article 9 limits protection for two reasons. Firstly, because you now have a reduced military size, and secondly, because it forces Japan to take a non-aggressive role in global policy. So what we see on their side and their mechanism for achieving change in this debate is on side proposition, they retroactively protect Japanese people from threats, which is firstly simply unintuitive. They're telling us that we need to attack other countries in order to protect people in our own country. That sounds ridiculous. But secondly, we think that that's a bad idea for all of the analysis in my speech that wasn't adequately dealt with. Let's jump into this first idea of protection. So we're told from the outset that there's some kind of threat that's being posed to Japan in the region. Think places like China and North Korea are posing a threat. So I told you from the bat, or off the bat, that there exists a very tenuous balance in East Asia because no one is doing anything out of the ordinary right now, which means that everyone is safe. We're acting in everyone's mutual best interest, and things are slowly de-escalating in an organic way. What we're told is that we need to retroactively protect Japanese people against China. So why doesn't that make sense? Because you don't retroactively protect yourself against China. I told you, and it wasn't challenged throughout this debate, that this is a symbolic act. This isn't an act that is likely in the real world to result in war. Because what's going to happen is that this is an act that is taking a stance, this is an act that's sending a message. We don't think that there's going to be a war. Realistically, in politics, that's not going to happen on our side of the house. But let's have a look at escalation, which wasn't responded to in this debate and has become the main problem. So we think that war will happen on their side of the house, which sounds contradictory to what I just said, and I understand that, but let's look at the analysis that wasn't responded to. Firstly, I told you about military escalation. What both sides concede is that on both sides of the house, we're getting bigger militaries from Japan and from China because we have less military de-escalation. They concede this. Secondly, we told you about democratic escalation, the fact that you're putting constructive methods of engagement on the back foot. We didn't see any response to this. We also told you about how this could result in war. And if we take it to the extreme on their side of the case, which Alex told us about, they basically said that the US would fight a war on Japan's behalf. So let's have a look at this idea of the US and tell you why we're conclusively winning that match. So we told you in our analysis that the relationship that the US has with Japan is premised on three things. Firstly, the fact that they have a vulnerable contractual obligation to Japan. Legally, they have to go and defend Japan under Article 9 when Japan is at risk. When they remove that, in the most direct sense, they take away that obligation. The US has no legal obligation to intervene. Secondly, we told you that this exists because it's not very risky for US troops to be in this area, right? Realistically, under Article 9, if you remove that, it becomes very risky for US troops in the area because you have heightened tensions, because China beefs up its military, because everyone gets very antsy and doesn't allow politicians into their airspace. This becomes very dangerous for troops, and you open yourself up to things like the American public feeling very vulnerable because they have soldiers. Realistically, America is never going to want its soldiers to die. Grant and Townsend both conclusively proved that the US would pull out if its soldiers were at risk. But finally, we told you about the political capital that the US loses when Japan takes on the role of the aggressor because of places like Israel, under which the US has faced massive scrutiny. We don't think that they have the political capital to make a venture like that again. They have to support countries that are the victims because that's the only way that they can take the moral high ground in international politics. The only response that we get is that the US likes strong nations and buffer zones. But realistically, throughout the debate, we've told you that Japan is not going to just immediately have this very strong military. It's going to take a very long time to build up your military after you remove this article, if it's as small as we believe that you are, that it is. So we don't think that Japan is A, going to have the ability to defend itself in the immediate future, and B, that America is likely to step in. On their side, what they have is a weak Japan that is left by the US in a state of heightened tensions in Southeast Asia. They didn't respond to our analysis about global discourse. Because we're the side that's better for Japan, I'm very proud to oppose.